So here's my song, unmastered, and then mastered. And there you have it. Hello there, my inspirations. My name is InspirAspir, and today I'm going to teach you how to master a song in Ableton using only the default stock plugins. And by that, I mean the audio effects included in Ableton Live. No external plugins, no VSTs. Now, for those of you who don't know what mastering is, it's an essential part to creating a song. Mastering your song is essentially the process of balancing your audio and making it sound louder while not clipping, while boosting certain frequency ranges of your song, and just overall the process of giving it a nice full volume, if you will. As you saw at the beginning of this video, I actually threw together a song and I compared the differences of it being unmastered and mastered using Ableton audio effects. So here's the song that I threw together. And one thing you'll notice is that the song is fairly quiet. Now sure, my computer volume is at, I don't know, roughly normal range. The range that I would normally use to listen to songs or videos. And I could increase the volume on my computer, which would obviously increase the sound of the song. But I'm actually going to keep my computer volume at the same level throughout this entire video, and you'll see why later on. Because essentially, once I master my song, it'll sound great at this volume level. That's one of the things, is I'll boost the volume. So first thing I'm going to do to master my song is let's pretend I've finished creating my song. I've made everything, it's all mixed together, it's good to go. So first thing I do is I would export my entire song. Now some people like to master their song in the same Ableton session of which they make their song, and to that I say go for it. But for some reason, personally, I prefer to take my song, export it, and then open up my mastering in a completely different Ableton session. And if you'd like, you can follow along and do that with me. But that being said, you don't necessarily have to. You could do it within your same Ableton session. When I export my song, I'm going to make sure that I export my master track, which is essentially saying that I want all of my sounds that I have included. I'm going to make sure that I select my entire songs. Be sure you do that. One way you can be sure that you have your entire song is selected is you can click over here on the left of your topmost track and then go to the bottom right corner of Ableton, past the point where your song finishes, hold shift and left click, and then you've highlighted your whole song, and then you can export, and it'll export everything that you just selected. I'm going to make sure that the file type is a WAV as opposed to an AIFF. Make sure your sample rate is at 44,100 Hertz. That should be the default. You could change it if you have reason to, but if you don't know what this means, then you probably shouldn't change it. I like to keep my bit depth at 16 and make sure that no dither is selected. Also, another thing that you want to make sure is that normalize is turned off. You do not want normalize to be on. Otherwise, this will mess with your volume balancing in the mastering process. So once you've done that, you can click export, name your file, place it wherever you want, and then I'm going to open up a new Ableton Live session. So after I've opened up a new Ableton session, what I'm going to do is delete all these MIDI tracks and then one of the audio tracks, because all I'll need is just one audio track. Then I'm going to take my song that I exported and drag it into Ableton. Now, I only exported a small clip of my song. You can export your entire song. The process is the same. I'm just doing this because I'll only be looking at one part of the song anyways. So now we actually get into the process of mastering this song. Let's take another listen to our song real quick, just to kind of get a feel of what we're working with. Okay. So to start mastering, we're going to go down to our master track and double click it, just so that we know that we're working with our master bus. Since we're only working with one audio file, essentially you could put it on this audio track, but I like to put it on the master track anyways, just kind of a force of habit at this point. First thing I like to put down is some reverb. Specifically, I found that I like the Bright Room preset for reverb, which is under Reverb, Room, and then Bright Room. The whole point of adding reverb is if you were to think of this song as having frames, we want a particular sound on a given frame to last for a few frames afterwards, just a few, and give it a teeny tiny reverb, which seems to connect the song and give it a little bit more flow, at least in my opinion. So currently if we were to play it, I'm sure it sounds pretty bad. It does. It sounds all watered down and not very good, and that's because our dry wet is currently set at 100%, and we do not want anything close to 100%. We only want a teeny tiny little bit of reverb. So I'm just going to drag this down to around 5 or 6%. That seems good. And now if we were to play it, it's very, very subtle, but I think it adds a lot to your mastering process overall in the end. So now we're going to add a compressor, and you could either add a compressor or you could add a glue compressor. For the sake of this mastering process, they essentially do the same thing. And now would be a great time for me to mention actually that there is no one way to do this. There's not a strict, oh, you have to follow this rule book, you have to. That is not the case at all in any circumstance. The mastering process is just about doing what makes your song sound the best at the end of the day, and this is just one particular way to do it. So feel free to experiment on your own and try different combinations of these audio effects to kind of simulate the same end results. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and add in a compressor. The goal of this compressor is to sort of smush our song together and kind of glue it all together. That's sort of why there's a glue compressor could be your second option. I'm going to go down here to the bottom of my compressor and click this button on the right, and then play my song. You'll notice that these peaks and valleys, they represent your audio file. I'm going to click this middle button, and I'm going to change this arc and this angle by clicking and dragging on this circle while also moving my mouse up. Just a smidge. And then I'm going to go back to here to analyze what I just did. And you'll notice that this orange bar started jumping and diving with the song. And that's how much the song is being compressed right now. Now, for now, we don't want too crazy of a compression. In fact, one thing you want to avoid at this point is overcompressing. We just want a little bit of change. We just want a small gluing. So I'm just gonna go ahead and tweak with these knobs. I'm going to change the ratio, the attack, and the release to get the result that I want, which is just a small amount of this orange line moving. Nothing too crazy. I think I'm just going to change the release maybe a little bit, maybe up the attack so it's not as intense. I don't know, just kind of playing around with this. And that seems good to my liking. Now what this compressor is doing is, for now, it's sort of making the song louder. If I were to turn this on and off while I'm playing, you can notice the difference. That's what that's doing. For now, I'm actually going to group my audio effects together. I just selected my two audio effects and hit Command-G on a Mac. I believe on Windows, it would be Control-G. So at the end of the day, I can turn this on and off to show you the difference between a mastered song and unmastered. Next, I'm going to add in some multiband dynamics right here and drag that in after my compressor. Keep in mind, if you didn't already know, order does matter. Ableton reads from left to right, meaning whatever is your leftmost audio effect will be processed first, and then whatever is after that will be processed on top of what has already been done. So if I were to put this compressor first, essentially I'm compressing my song, and then I would have reverb right after it, so then it would add the reverb to my already compressed song. Whereas if I undo it, it's currently adding reverb to my song and then compressing that result. So keep in mind, order does matter. So right now we currently have reverb, a compressor, and then some multiband dynamics. Now this multiband dynamics is gonna this is gonna vary based on your song. By that I mean you're gonna have to tweak these frequency ranges so that they suit your song. Essentially, you're gonna change this high to be wherever your high frequencies start. This will usually be maybe your white noises and FX and maybe some of your melodies. So you're gonna have to find the frequency range where those layers start, or at least where you want the high frequencies to be amplified, and then set this here. Say for example, I consider this song to I want my highest to start around 4800 hertz. This essentially means that all of my high frequencies will be 4800 hertz and above. And then I can do the same with my low frequencies except for below. Say for example, I want to work with frequencies, 334 hertz and below. And then your mids are whatever's in between these frequency ranges. So this more or less divides your song into 3 different ranges. You have your highs, mids, and lows. What you can then do is you can adjust their inputs and you can adjust their outputs. And you can also adjust the output of everything as a whole and you can adjust the amount that this multiband dynamics actually works on your song. So if I were to play my song, you should notice there will be some bars that will show up down here, depending on your 3 ranges. One thing you'll notice is that my low ends seem to be pretty high in comparison to everything else, which is good for EDM, but at the same time, you don't want crazy high bass. At least not in comparison to the rest of the elements of your song. If I were to adjust these input and output knobs, you'll notice exactly what this will do. Let's work with the high frequencies. If I were to change the output of my high frequencies, it would sound like this. And I can, of course, do the same thing by lowering them. So you can tweak these knobs and adjust them according to your liking. One thing you can do is you can solo each layer. So if I wanted to solo my mids and play it, I'm only hearing frequency ranges between 334 Hz and around 4800 Hz. And then I can change my knobs to my liking. So maybe I wanted to have a little bit more sound coming in. Maybe I wanted to adjust the output just a little bit. Now, at least my understanding of this is, and I could be wrong, the input knob adjusts the volume of this particular frequency range for those sounds coming into it. So for example, my unmastered song, this reverb plus the compressor going into this multiband dynamics, when I'm adjusting these input knobs, that adjusts that volume, and then the output adjusts what comes out of that. It's essentially saying I want to get a boost of these particular frequency ranges, and then I want to boost their volume. I don't know if I'm particularly explaining that right, but I'm just going to adjust these values to my liking. And the goal here is just to get a general balanced feel, and to create something that just sounds good and balanced overall. Now, one thing you can do to work with this actually is I'm going to drag in a spectrum at the end of everything, but not necessarily in my grouping, just because I don't need that to be turned on and off. Essentially what your spectrum is, it's just a way to look at your frequency ranges for your given song. So if I were to play it and look at my spectrum, I can click this arrow to expand it. This is my song where this x-axis along the bottom represents frequencies on a log scale, just so you realize. And then the y-axis is my decibels, or my volume. And one thing you'll notice if I were to play my song is that my bass, and more specifically my kicks, my really low frequencies, are hitting a lot louder than my higher frequencies. So what I'm going to do with my multiband dynamics is try and balance that out a little bit. I'm going to try and amplify my highs a little bit, and I'm going to maybe consider lowering my lows, but I don't know if I'll do that at the end of the day. While I'm working on this, I'm realizing that one thing I should have done at the very beginning is added a limiter at the very end. This limiter is going to stay at the end of your track, and we're going to keep it at 0 decibels, and this is essentially saying that we don't want our song to go past 0 decibels ever. If your song goes over 0 decibels, Ableton will take that song and just sort of compress it and push it back down. And this is actually what will give us that nice volume boost at the end of the day, is that for the most part our song will roughly be around 0 decibels. And again, like I said earlier, overall your goal is just to create something that sounds balanced and even, at least according to you. At the end of the day, you're only doing this for you, unless of course you're a professional and you're doing this for someone else, but at the same time, you wouldn't be using Ableton plugins. So that being said, this is all for you, so just do whatever you think sounds best. So once I'm happy with my multiband dynamics and I think that everything sounds a little balanced, I'm going to add in a saturator, specifically a bit warmer. I'm going to add that in after my multiband dynamics, but before my limiter. Remember, the limiter will always stay at the end of everything. This saturator will add a little bit of color and, as its name implies, make everything sound a little bit warmer. And by that, I mean it makes everything seem a little bright, if you could describe these sounds. Now, currently it's a little bit strong. I think if I were to play right now, it'll probably sound a little aggressive. Oh wow, most definitely. Oh. So you don't want that. That obviously adds way too much compression and just sounds bad. But we can always tone this down a little bit, or actually probably a lot. So I'm going to turn down the drive a little bit. That just determines how strong the saturator is. It was at 6 decibels, now we're putting it at, I don't know, around 2 or so. So cutting it down by a third. I'm actually going to turn down the dry wet to around 30% or so, and I'm going to turn the output to, I don't know, around, I'm going to turn it really low to like negative 20 some decibels, maybe 25. And now we're going to play it. And you can play around with the dry wet knobs and the drive if you want. Maybe I want to make it a little bit brighter. So it adds a little bit of it sort of smooths out the edges to your song and takes away anything that's too crisp. One thing you may have noticed is technically it did make the song a little bit quieter. Before, when the saturator was off, you'll notice that our limiter was peaking a little bit, and by that I mean we were going a little bit over 0 decibels. And then now if we turn this on, that doesn't even happen. So technically our song got quieter, and we don't necessarily want quiet at the end of the day. We want it to be a little bit louder. That's one of the main parts of the mastering process. But I assure you at the end of the day, we can make it louder, so don't worry about that. Next, we're going to add in an EQ8 after our saturator. This EQ will simply be used to remove our low-end frequencies from stereo, more so turn it into mono. Stereo, which is sort of a way to picture music kind of 3D, when you wear 2 earbuds and you can hear music in your left and right, and there's sort of a balance maybe in the middle. That's stereo, right? Is you sort of get directional feel to your sounds. There's left, right, what have you. Essentially, super low frequencies you can't hear as stereo and should be more so as mono. And trying to push it as stereo ultimately just kind of adds mess if you were to play it through big speakers and stuff like that. So essentially this EQ is just going to be used to remove low ends from stereo. We'll change this mode to MS, which stands for mids and sides, as in like the middle and left and right. We're going to click this and turn it to S, which is our sides. Let's change this point to this particular mode so that we can drag it down here and change this Q value so we sort of have a smooth slope. Let's change it to something like that. Roughly around 200, 300 range. Roughly around there is good. Essentially what we've just done is removed these frequency ranges from the sides of our ears, effectively, like I said, taking out low frequencies from stereo. Next, we're going to add in another EQ after that one. And this is for you to actually EQ your song the way that you normally would, EQ something. I'm just going to sort of look at the frequency ranges that stick out as too crazy and maybe look at some that I want to stand out a little bit more. This is just minor tweaks. This is just doing, again, this is more or less just adding the fine details to everything. This is more or less just going to be something that you're going to have to tweak and adjust to your liking. Now, one of the final steps is we're going to add in another compressor. And this time, this compressor will be used to push our song above 0 decibels. That is, if there wasn't a limiter here, we would push it above 0 decibels. But because it is here, effectively what this will do is more or less make our entire song sound roughly the same volume. But one thing we want to consider is dynamic range. Just because we can make everything the same volume doesn't mean we necessarily should. I'm going to play my song and sort of move this guy. I'm going to adjust this knee a little bit. And I'm going to look at this guy over here. This yellow bar will be pushing up. And that's how much the song is going over 0 decibels. And I personally don't like to go anything more than 6. I like a good, consistent 3 or 4. So I want this yellow bar to be bouncing around here for the majority of my song. So I'm going to play my song. One thing you will notice is if you add too much compression, your song will just be overcompressed and it'll just sound bad. You just want a little bit, just nothing too crazy. Now, another thing you can do is instead of changing this knee, you can adjust a little bit of the output, just increasing the decibel range purely, and so you can obviously add a crazy amount. So if you were to use this, you just want to add maybe a decibel or 2, nothing more than that. And one thing I want to emphasize is just because you added these in earlier doesn't mean that they're set in stone, doesn't mean they're locked in place. You can always go back and change your multiband dynamics, for example, and say, oh, I want to lower this frequency range now, and maybe I want to change this to that. But again, like I've mentioned so many times, you just have to tweak until you have exactly what you want. And then at the end of it all, what we've just done is mastered our song. We turned a song from being unmastered into mastered. So here's my song, unmastered, and then mastered. And remember earlier how I said I kept my computer volume at... Remember earlier, I mentioned that I kept my computer volume at the same level. So that change in volume was just purely from us mastering the song. It wasn't from me changing my volume. So then what we can do is after, make sure your effects are turned on, what you can do is you can select your song, you can go to File, Export, Make sure you have your mastered track selected. Make sure it's your whole length that you want. The file type should be WAV again. Sample rate should be the same. Your file type, sample rate, and bit depth should all be the same as the way that you exported your unmastered version of your song. Now, if you exported your unmastered song with a sample rate of 96,000, say for example, then you should export your mastered song with a sample rate of 96,000. It should be the same. Same with your bit depth. If you happen to do 24 for your unmastered, you should do 24 for your mastered. Keep them consistent. Now, one thing you're gonna do is you're gonna add in dither. Essentially what dithering does is it adds a little bit of dynamic range. I don't really know the process behind it. I'm not gonna say that I do, but from my experience, I recommend using either rectangular or triangular. I like rectangular. So when you export your mastered song, make sure that some form of dithering is on. And again, make sure that no normalizing is on. We don't want normalizing. And then everything else looks good. And then you can export it, and then you have your mastered song. You can export it wherever you want, save it how you want, and there you have it. So that'll do it. I hope that helps. That was how you master your song in Ableton using only the default plugins that come with Ableton, just the audio effects. And keep in mind, I didn't even touch more than 2/3 of these audio effects. And as I mentioned before, there is no one way to do this. There are multiple ways to tackle the same problem. You can essentially do the same thing with different audio effects. But more or less, you'll be using a lot of EQing, compressing, and maybe some saturation, a little bit of reverb. And also multiband dynamics, highly recommend. I think they'll be your good friend. But that's how you do it using only Ableton's audio effects, no external plugins. Naturally, if you use external plugins and VSTs, more or less your quality will probably be better. After all, that's why they're made, that's why they exist. Quality is a little bit better, but if you don't have access to that, this is how you do it. So I hope that helps, hope you enjoyed, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Bye.